Welcome.
Welcome to Hopkins on the Hill.
Welcome to Hopkins on the Hill at home.
Hello, I'm Congressman Dutch Rubersberger, and I'm grateful to participate in this year's Hopkins on the Hill at Home event, although I wish we were able to celebrate together. I always tell people how lucky we are in Baltimore to have Johns Hopkins, a world-class institution, right on our doorstep. Aside from keeping Marylanders healthy and treating over 250,000 second district residents, Johns Hopkins is an integral part of our economy, employing over 12,000 second district residents. They also empower the next generation of leaders to excel, investing more than $9.2 million in annual financial aid for students in my district alone. Johns Hopkins performs cutting-edge, life-saving work each and every day, and for that, I'm very thankful. I promise to continue fighting for every dollar I can to empower Johns Hopkins to keep leading the way in global medical research, innovation, and treatment.
We approach our research with a simple philosophy of seeing, understanding, and controlling the mechanisms that are at play when we defend against weapons of mass destruction. We launched the consortium in July of 2020, and we are now investigating how various materials and chemistries both perform and evolve within the extreme pressures and temperatures and radiation that are associated with both agent defeat and nuclear blasts.
This experiment is helping us to figure out how engineered metal powders and composites like aluminum react. The powder is coated on the wire, and then using a power supply, we heat up the wire, which in turn heats the powder until it ignites and burns in the surrounding air. We can use a high-speed video camera, pyrometer, or other optical devices to determine the time and temperature of ignition. I don't think we ever want to be in a position where we have to safely destroy extreme and hazardous materials. But we also know that this happens when we consider the recent chemical attacks in Syria. My work is going to help protect humans and our environment because we're finding new innovative ways and strategies to prepare, test, and characterize metal reactive systems that provide high heat and release combustion products that can kill these harmful organisms like anthrax and destroy toxins like sarin while they're burning, all mitigating the risk of exposure to the environment and to humans.
We have a broad range of programs that are designed to develop a diverse workforce for future generations. These programs include summer internships for high school students, full-year internships for undergraduate students that link closely with Morgan State University, and finally, travel fellowships that allow PhD students and postdocs to spend up to 4 months at national labs to gain critical professional experience. The Material Science and Extreme Environments University Research Alliance is funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency and spans across 18 different institutions that include universities, national labs, and companies.
Welcome to Hopkins on the Hill, and a very special thanks to Maryland's 2nd Congressional District Representative Dutch Rubersberger for his message. So today, We will be speaking with Hopkins folks associated with two major research programs, the Materials Science in Extreme Environments, or MC, and the Materials in Extreme Dynamic Environments, or MEADE programs. Both research programs are under this umbrella of the Hopkins Extreme Materials Institute. The goal of these two federally funded research programs is to really develop technologies to keep people safe. So we will think about Americans as well as our fellow global citizens. So first we're going to dive into the program MC, and then we're going to pivot and we'll talk more about MEADE. The video you just saw gave a little bit of background about MC, and it featured Dr. Tim Weihs and Dr. Carrie Lee Chittersing, who we have with us today. So welcome, Tim and Carrie Lee. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, Carrie, thanks. It's good to be here. Thanks for having us.
So Tim, let's start with this landscape of weapons of mass destruction, or WMD. Where are they in the world right now? And can you remind us of a recent use of WMD?
Sure. There's actually two that come to mind. Certainly a recent use Carrie Lee had just mentioned in Syria back in 2018 and earlier. Unfortunately, there have been uses against civilian populations of chemical agents, chemical gases such as sarin, mustard gas. They're around the world. They are used, unfortunately, in situations where civilians are harmed and killed. The other one that I would note is the risk of nuclear weapons. And we hear recent decisions and discussions with North Korea, which is improving its ability to launch these weapons. So I think that risk, many would say, is growing.
So then what is the goal of the MC program as it relates to these weapons of mass destruction?
That's a great question, Carrie. So there's really two slightly different goals depending on which of the weapons we're talking about. In case of the chemical agents that we mentioned, our hope is actually to develop technologies that will be able to neutralize those agents, whether it's a bioagent or a chem agent, before they're used. So it's really trying to prevent an attack. In the case of the nuclear weapons, our goal is not as much try to prevent the attacks as to understand what happens in the case of a nuclear blast, so we can help mitigate some of the consequences. So understanding the radiation, the blast itself, the shock wave, as well as the evolving chemistry. So if we understand that, we can help mitigate some of it.
So with these two kind of separate goals of prevention through neutralization and mitigation for nuclear weapons, there must be different mechanisms then that you're relying on for these different goals. Can you talk a little bit about those mechanisms?
Sure. So we really try to understand what's happening. So we're focusing on this from a scientific basis. So we're trying to develop the science that will allow the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, to help design programs and weapons that will help neutralize or mitigate. And so in the case of the agent defeat, we're really trying to look at combustion itself and understand what are the processes when metal powders actually burn in air, and how do they produce heat through that combustion process. On the nuclear side, we're worrying about what is the effect, say, for example, of a shock wave hitting a material at very high speeds. Can we simulate that? Can we actually measure that?
Interesting. So with this idea of combustion and needing this heat from combustion, Carrie Lee, the experiments that you showed in the video were about combustion. Can you talk a little bit about your work and the key factors that you're looking for in the use of combustion to neutralize chemical agents?
Sure, no problem. So my primary focus is on studying combustion of metals. And so when we think about metals burning, we're thinking about very high temperatures released. There are several factors that can affect how well these metals are burning. So for example, their particle size, the oxidizing environment that they're in. We're thinking also in just the typical metal macrostructure, what chemistries are there, like different metals burn at different rates and in different phases. So we're trying to explore all these different parameters that can affect how fast the metal burns, how much heat is released as the metal is burning, and that in turn, and the type of products that are being generated as the metal burns too, because all these tie in to affect how well they interact for that targeted application, which is to neutralize this chemical agent.
So when you're talking about this, you're talking about in-lab experiments where you're looking at these different influences on that combustion level. But how do you take something from an in-lab experiment where you're able to control a lot of those variables and translate it to the field where you could be somewhere in the world needing this information, this science to actually neutralize or mitigate a weapon of mass destruction? How do you make that translation?
So really, all the lab or controlled environment experimentation is used to build these models or to translate into these models for these weapon codes that NUTRA is designing. So for the application side of things, or fundamental science experiments are going to be feeding into that application side. So we're taking things from a single particle level, trying to understand things on a controlled scale, and then using that to feed into our computational fluid dynamics, which will account for the environmental changes. And that can also account for the larger scale experimentation.
I see. So you're investigating how all those factors might be related. So when you do translate, you're ready. You're
right.
On the scene.
So ideally, when you're designing for applications purposes, you'd like to have like a single simple equation that pretty much describes how these metals are burning. And we are doing the experimentation to develop that equation essentially, or to develop that model so that it can be somewhat of like a plug and play for the application.
Interesting. So you essentially have to really think through all the different factors, the range of potential variables for those factors in order to kind of get this equation together to figure out the temperature at which you need to burn.
Yeah.
Do you have, what in your lab, what tools are you using in order to kind of harness all of that information and really measure closely?
So we have several tools. One of the examples that I showed in the video was just using something like a simple hot wire filament to ignite these powders. That will tell us pretty much what are the minimal ignition thresholds, because that's important for us to understand how much heat input is required to get these powders going to start burning, right? We are also in the process of designing a customized chamber that will allow us to not only see how these powders are burning in air, but when we introduce a simulant toxin to sarin, for example, DIM, how does the metal particles when they're burning interact with the simulant? So we're also exploring different ways of igniting these powders, for example, using a plasma or a laser. So these are all just different experimentation that is going on in the lab, because these will help to tune how well the particles are burning in air and how they're igniting. We can establish what the temperatures, the pressures, that kind of stuff, which will all lead into developing these models.
So it's interesting to say you're designing the chamber, right? So that's not something you can purchase, or it's already made somewhere. That has to be kind of a conceptualization to a customized kind of secure space in order to have some sort of combustion going and then introduce the agent in order to really get kind of that experiment going to see exactly how those two are interacting. Sounds very both intellectually intensive, but also resource intensive. So Tim, bringing you back in for a minute, how does the MSEE Center really secure those resources needed to conduct these experiments or design chambers needed for these types of experiments to be done safely, and then eventually, translate this knowledge into neutralization of weapons of mass destruction in the real world? Where do those resources come from?
Sure, happy to share thoughts on that. So, Carrie, they come from the federal government. So a number of years ago, I think it was 2018, they came out with a broad agency announcement. They said they wanted to establish, DITRA wanted to establish a center focused on materials in the extreme environments associated with weapons of mass destruction. And so I worked with others to pull together a team of 40 PIs across 13 different states and many organizations. And we've pulled together our concepts and our plans and put in a proposal that fortunately was successful. And DITRA now is committed to funding this for the next 5 years, but also beyond that, potentially for another 4 years. So our hope is a total of actually 9 years. And what that does is it gets these researchers, us collectively, working together in a very cooperative manner. Very often we're funded as individual researchers or principal investigators. And sometimes we feel like we're in competition with each other. But in this case, now we've been brought together to work, as a team, as a big team. And that really builds many efficiencies and lots of collaborations into the system. So that's worked really well. And we also, Carrie Lee was talking about her experiments and trying to confirm what's happening at that single particle level. We also work closely with the folks at national labs. These are both the defense labs and the Department of Energy labs, or DOE labs. And they're wonderful partners. We have some of them on our team. But as we develop knowledge, as we develop models, we try to transition those to those federal labs as well, so they can scale up and do tests at larger levels.
So you mentioned DTRA, and just for everybody who doesn't speak in acronyms,
Sure.
as we tend to, that's the Defense Threat Reduction
Correct.
Agency, which is your main funder. But I want to go back to what you started with,
Sure.
that you pulled together 40 collaborators across 13 states.
Right.
So tell me about that. Is that like you're calling up old friends? You guys have meet for a beer, or is that, how do you harness 40 collaborators, to which, you had even said, typically we work in competition with each other.
Right.
How do you change that paradigm so that you all are working towards a common goal that is funded through a single agency?
Well, Carrie, it is a big shift, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. Fortunately, I've been in this area or this field for quite a while, and I've been funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA, for a number of years. So I knew a lot of the current investigators and some from other fields. And so I particularly looked for people I knew who would work well together. Because you can pull these people together and fund them, but if they're not willing to actually put in the extra effort to collaborate and to get into the biweekly meetings and to share materials, share models, share data, it doesn't work well. And so I was very cautious to pull in people that would actually work well together. And it's proved to be extremely valuable. I'm thrilled with the team we have, with the leadership on the team. And I think the agency is excited too at what they're seeing. They really see people working together, because they come on, their program managers come on to our calls and they say, okay, well, let's listen to what's happening, and they can see us working together.
So I think that's really for anybody who's sitting in a science class out there, it's an important thing to note that as the field of science grows, the collaborations grows. So all of those skills of collaboration, working together, being able to come to a table and agree to disagree respectfully and actually work towards a common goal, I think they're probably more important now than ever, with MC being a relatively new research program and really starting and looking forward to almost a decade of research yet to come. We also want to take a moment to highlight another program that has been more established for a longer standing period of time, and that's the Materials in Extreme Dynamic Environment, or MEADE program. And it's got the same goal as MC, to keep people safe, but it has a different approach to do so. So let's take a look.
I'm Lori Graham-Brady. I'm the director of the Center for Materials in Extreme Dynamic Environments at Johns Hopkins University, where I'm also a professor of civil and systems engineering. We don't actually make armor, but we work on the materials that comprise armor. In particular, we're trying to make armor lighter, stronger, and more effective.
These experiments are the steps along the way to the development of materials that are needed on the battlefield, in extreme climates, or in other extreme environments. In this experiment, we are seeking to understand the response of armor ceramics to projectile impact. Immediately beneath a projectile, particles from the fragmented ceramic rapidly flow, compact, and continue to break down. We're studying these behaviors using X-ray imaging and advanced algorithms that allow us to see and reconstruct the particle structure during these crucial few milliseconds that determine whether and how the armor resists penetration. We're currently developing new, even more advanced experimental facilities here at Hopkins that will enable new studies of material deformation in extreme environments to further improve material performance in the battlefield.
MEADE has an enormous scope. It brings together people who test materials, people who develop computational models, and people who actually make the materials. Typically, these have been very siloed, and one of the hallmark features of this program is it brings those groups together in order to design new materials.
Being able to work on these teams has been important for my development as an investigator because of the access I have to state-of-the-art facilities and subject matter experts across a range of disciplines. I know that my work is going to make a difference in the world because of the careful design of our research program and the collaborative interactions we have on a regular basis with our government sponsors.
MEADE is funded by the Army Research Laboratory. What's unique about this program is that it's a collaborative research alliance where we partner with ARL to design better materials. In this program, we've trained over 300 students at all levels. This is the next generation of experts in materials designed for extreme environments.
I've worked closely with PhD students and research engineers at Hopkins to help design and bring to life some of the most advanced facilities in the world for these studies. Working closely with students and government sponsors on these projects has been the most enjoyable aspect of my time at Hopkins.
MEADE has established tools that will be in place in the Army for years to come. We believe that what MEADE is doing will lead to future generations of armor that will save soldiers' lives.
So developing materials that save soldiers' lives is not a light task, but making lighter weight armor is one of the key functions. We'd like to welcome Dr. Lori Graham-Brady, who is the director of the Center for Materials in Extreme Dynamic Environments, or MEADE. Welcome, Lori. Great to have you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for having me.
So, Lori, obviously the durability of body armor is critical to keeping soldiers safe. But why is it important that the materials used to make the armor are lightweight?
Sure. So if you look at body armor, for example, taking more weight off the soldier's back makes them safer and healthier in a lot of ways. So right now, the current ceramic that's used in typical body armor is silicon carbide. We work on boron carbide that's about 20% less dense than silicon carbide. So what that means is if we could bring the protection performance of boron carbide up to the level of silicon carbide, then a typical vest would weigh about 4 pounds less, which doesn't sound like a lot, but to put it in perspective, that's about 5 cans of Campbell's soup. So the soldier is wearing this extra 4 pounds all day in different temperatures, over 115 degrees in the desert, up steep mountains. So anything to lighten the load increases their range, agility, and ultimately safety. It also helps to increase the compliance. So it's difficult to put these vests on. So if we can make them lighter weight, then the soldier is more likely to wear them day to day, all day.
So the new material that you're speaking of, the kind of look that you're doing right now is to make sure it's as durable as I believe you said silicone.
Silicon carbide is the standard, and boron carbide is our material. Yep.
So interesting. So you're trying to make this material just as kind of durable, but it is this wonderful property that it weighs less for soldiers to wear. What about vehicle armor, right? So vehicle armor, does that need to be more lightweight, or what are you working on there?
Absolutely. So vehicles tend to use metals more than ceramics. So if we look at vehicle armor, we're studying magnesium, which is, to give you some perspective, about 1/3 less dense than aluminum and about 1/4 of the density of steel. So what that reduced weight means is that you can increase the range of operation of the vehicles, you can reduce supply chain issues, ultimately increase the safety for the soldier, and decrease the carbon footprint for the military. So it's a win on all sides.
That's amazing, because now we're also talking about how these materials are interacting with the environment, right? And how that vehicle may be more carbon neutral. So in the video, ceramics were mentioned as a type of material that is studied using X-ray technology during impact. And you just mentioned metals for the vehicles. Are ceramics and metals the only types of materials that are studied by MEADE, or are there other materials?
In fact, there are 3 classes of materials that we're looking at. So ceramics and metals, as you mentioned, I already described, and composites. So to generalize, ceramics are often used in body armor because they have a high hardness, which helps to what they call defeat the impactor. So something hits it and it kind of gets splayed out and can't penetrate. So we're studying boron carbide as our lightweight model material. Metals tend to be used more often in vehicle armor, and we're studying magnesium. And finally, composites. They're used in layering for both vehicle and body armor. So our model material is a combination of S2 glass and epoxy resin. And this particular composite is used as part of multi-layer vehicle armor, but you'll see composites in both applications.
And when you talk about layers, are they thin layers? Are they thicker layers? How do those materials truly layer together? Does it matter about the context in which you're layering them?
Yeah, so they lay them on top of each other, and typically in a composite, it's woven. So you can think of like a fabric, right? A fabric is stronger by the way in which you weave the threads together. And so you could think of taking a fabric and laying fabric pieces on top of each other with a sort of hardened resin that holds it all together.
So I imagine you're producing these materials and you're testing them in this close partnership with the Army Research Laboratory, or ARL. So through this partnership, what are you actually producing to supply to your partner, the Army Research Laboratory?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're really focused on three major transitions that we want from each of our three material classes. We'd like to produce materials, we'd like to produce computational codes, and generally our materials by design framework. So we want this framework to be demonstrated. So to just give you some idea of each of those, the idea behind the materials is that we want to create at-scale specimens that could be tested and serve as models for the next generation materials. We're working with industry to make those larger scale specimens that we actually can't create in our university labs. We tend to create research scale specimens. So University of Delaware is one of our partner organizations. They're working with industry to make multi-layer composite samples on the order of a square foot. Rutgers is another one of our partners, and they're working with industry to make new versions of doped boron carbide. So the idea there is that we're providing testable samples that are not just, our tiny lab scale samples. This second transition of codes, the idea is that we don't want to just write codes here at the university that sort of stay here at the university. We want them to transition over to the Army. We want them to be able to implement those codes in their own packages that they use to analyze armor. So we've made an active goal of transitioning codes over. So for example, in ceramics, we have an integrative model that's been incorporated into and demonstrated on a number of government-only codes. EPIC is one example. So it's been demonstrated and functioning. And then our third transition is sort of demonstrating this overall materials by design loop. The idea is that we move on from trial and error testing of materials, and we have a more disciplined approach. We define specific physics-based goals. Tim mentioned mechanisms early on. It's really what we're looking for, are specific mechanisms for the material, and bring together new processing routes, testing, and modeling efforts to consistently pursue that goal.
So one thing that I did not have in kind of my awareness before you mention it is the computational models that you actually want to transfer code, that the product is not just the material, but it's also kind of a computer saturated product as well, so that this information can be transmitted and used in additional experimentation that the ARL folks might be doing. So tell me a little bit about how ARL can use those computational models and what they do with them in order to know more about the materials and their performance in the field.
Yeah, so ARL is able to, by providing these codes, they can bring new physics into their models and develop a better understanding, and actually even through the physics-based models, be more equipped to design the material because they understand what makes a better material. And I probably should mention a really unique characteristic of this program is this tight partnership between ARL and the universities in Mead. So we're not just a center that has multiple university partners. Every task, everything that's done in Mead has an ARL partner identified. Every materials group has both university and ARL co-leads. And these partnerships are reinforced by regular meetings, interactions. So the transitions aren't just, I made a code, here you go. the ARL scientists are in on the ground floor. We're all working together to develop those codes. So transition isn't necessarily a handoff. It's the idea that something has been developed together, and the final product is just a shared product. So this is a really rich collaboration, and the transitions are so much more streamlined than the traditional center model.
Well, and I think it allows for further understanding of the materials. If you have the material and you have partners that help build it to scale, that can be transferred over to ARL, but then you're also able to supply the coding so that you can use that to continue to understand how this material performs and to conduct additional experiments. I mean, I think that just kind of consistently allows for the building upon knowledge, right? Is that the thought process here, that you're constantly trying to ensure that what's developed and transferred is something that is not just a here you go final product, but it's something that can be further explored?
Exactly. Yeah. And, this is a real challenge. These are really challenging problems. They happen super fast. An impact event is on the order of 100 microseconds. And the blink of an eye is 100 milliseconds. So this event happens like in 1,000th of a blink of an eye. And so to ask our experimentalists to see and understand everything that's going on devoid of models is just unrealistic. There's a lot you can see in experiments, but the models really help fill in the blanks. And the expertise that our ARL partners bring and the experience that they have really helps us to answer these questions in a much more realistic and holistic way.
So there's a major intellectual product that gets transferred as well. And you had mentioned materials by design earlier, and that the MEADE approach is bringing together these individuals from different silos and kind of working together on materials development, computational models, and then the materials testing. Tell me more about this materials by design concept.
Sure. So the concept of materials by design isn't specific to this program, but I think in MEADE, we've been at the forefront of developing this process for specifically materials in extreme environments, specifically materials for armor applications. So we've brought together research in high rate experiments, computational modeling, material synthesis by developing a common language and a coherent set of goals. So in particular, we focus on key mechanisms in the material. So you can think about in ceramics, you worry about fracture and fragmentation. In metals, we worry about void growth that leads to spallation of the material. In composites, we worry about debonding of the fiber from its surrounding matrix. So if we can identify those key mechanisms, and there's more than one mechanism in every material, which complicates things, but if you can identify those, then materials by design, the common language we speak is always about addressing those mechanisms, not about specific parameters that each silo is sort of comfortable working with.
And then I imagine the ultimate then is to be at this place where you say, we need a material that looks like this, that fit these criteria. Knowing what we know through all of these experiments and where bonds could come unhinged, where ceramics could fragment, we could attempt to build material or recommend material that would meet those criteria. Is that kind of the idea of by design?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So you decide up front what you want and go after it. You don't just hope that you'll stumble across something that helps you address the problem. And in fact, this is something that the Army has recognized for some time. They have actually designated materials by design as one of their top 10 research priority areas.
Very interesting. Now, you've talked a lot about the people that you're working with. You had mentioned other academic institutes. You've mentioned industry. You've definitely mentioned ARL. I'd like to bring Tim and Carrie Lee back into this conversation. I want to know more about how MEADE and MC potentially work together, because you're both under this umbrella of the Hopkins Extreme Materials Institute. We know that you have collaborators all over outside of Hopkins, but do you work with each other in any way under this umbrella? Do you share best practices? How do you guys interact?
A lot is the simple answer, but I can give you more detail to that. First, Lori has run and been part of this wonderful MEADE program, and it's nearing the end of its 10 years, but MC, being much newer, was able to leverage all of the know-how and the knowledge, the infrastructure that the MEADE program put together. So that's been wonderful. I've been part of that MEADE program as well. I've worked on magnesium alloys that Lori had mentioned. And so we've been able to share a lot of best practices, whether that's how do you organize this many, 40 or 50 investigators? How do you run weekly meetings? How do you develop professional development courses for your students and postdocs? How do you help them give better presentations and write better papers? Those are all things we can do because we have many people working together. And so under HEMI, this Hopkins Extreme Materials Institute, we both have been able to leverage these practices, and us certainly more than Lori, because really under Lori's program, they developed them.
So if we're working on, kind of supporting each other internally under a Hopkins umbrella and sharing best practices across these programs, Lori, how are you taking then some of this information and translating it out into how you're establishing and maintaining, a decade's worth of collaboration with other investigators all over the country?
We've learned a lot of lessons about collaboration across a large program. So to give you some sense of our structure, our primary partners are Caltech, University of Delaware, and Rutgers. But overall, there have been 24 institutions engaged in the MEADE program, and every activity is partnered with ARL. And the population includes high school students, undergraduates, master's students, PhD students, postdoctoral scholars, faculty, research scientists at the labs. So this is a huge organization with a lot of different lenses to look at it. So I think the business community refers to it as matrix management. There's all these different dimensions that describe the center, the level of experience, the organization that people come from, whether they do experiments, modeling, or making materials. So what we've had to do is think about how we get those people talking to each other frequently enough that they actually speak the same language and move in the same direction. And Tim's been a huge part of that. He was a big part of MEADE leadership from the beginning. And I think I hope that has helped for MC going forward to kind of build on that structure.
Yes, we wouldn't have been as successful as we are today without all that standing infrastructure that was developed.
So another resource that you've both kind of noted here are your workforce, right? These are massive programs, both MC and MEADE, and developing a workforce, particularly a diverse workforce, is so essential to so many research programs. How does a focus on diverse workforce development penetrate both your programs, and how does it help you reach these goals of keeping soldiers safe or people safe from weapons of mass destruction?
Well, both programs have been actively working with particularly Morgan State University. They've been a wonderful partner there. Dean Yu has been great in working with us. And so we have undergraduate students who will work during the academic year at Morgan State on a problem of interest, and then come and spend time either at Hopkins or another one of the sort of consortia partners doing research with other scientists during the summer months. And it's been a great program. And I'm keen to look at more. We just recently set up a workshops on uncertainty quantification within the MC program. And we were just on a call with 4 or 5 faculty members from Morgan State who want to participate in that. And ultimately that will bring in their students as well. So it's having great partners like that make the big difference.
And Lori, what about at MEADE? How have you helped cultivate a diverse workforce?
Yeah, so we've had, just recently did the count, over 600 people involved with the center so far. And over half of those are students. So over 300 students at different levels have come through the program. And that includes high school students from underprivileged high schools, undergraduates from HBCUs and minority serving institutions, PhD students, postdocs, the kind of the full range of training levels. So that's an enormous impact on the next generation of engineers. And in fact, I think we've had something like 50 to 60 students from HBCUs and minority serving institutions, excuse me, involved in research in the MEADE program. So we think we've really broadened and deepened the workforce that's available for materials in extreme environments, which is critically important for the government, the defense-related industry, and academia. This is really ultimately the group of people that will be called on to keep us all safe in the future through critical research.
Well, I want to thank you both, or all three of you, for being with us today and discussing the MC and the MEADE programs. And if guests out there who are tuning in have questions, please do submit them through the Hopkins at Home platform. If you three are okay with it, we'll take a few questions from the audience. Does that sound reasonable?
That's great.
That's good.
So Carrie Lee, one came through that's for you, and it's about COVID. And it's very specifically, did COVID interrupt your experiments? And how did you navigate the last year and progress on your research during a time of COVID?
Yes, COVID definitely, thank you so much for that question. COVID definitely did impact the progress of experimentation. I'm a core experimentalist, so COVID actually opened up the area of artificial intelligence for me and did a lot of more modeling or computational work. As a matter of fact, some of those experiments that I was describing, they involve several particles burning at very high temperatures and a lot of data to be analyzed. And so we thought, why not take the approach of artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning, to help us with this analysis for all this large data set. So now we're developing algorithms in partnership with Tim Weihs and Brian Barnes from ARL. There's other professors within the Department of Electrical Engineering, Mark Foster, who has been working with us as a team to establish these algorithms that are able to track single particles frame by frame in this high-speed videos to establish, as a function of time, how is the particle size changing? How is different phases forming changing, which will all help to tune or better help us to better understand how these reactions are occurring. It's been a new era for me, and it's pretty exciting because now I'm expanding my reach besides from just experimenting to modeling as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So diverse, and you're going to help, be the bridges between silos. And when you all get in the same room and speak the same language, you're going to be like, I speak fluent in 2 languages.
And it's very helpful because sometimes there is a lacking, or that bridge is kind of wobbly between computation experts and experimentalists. And so if you're able to meet the needs of the experimentalists with the models that you're developing and vice versa, that's very, very, very good.
Amazing. We have 2 questions that have come in that are somewhat related. Lori, they're for you. I'll pose both of them. The first one is from Dan M. Thanks for tuning in. I've worn body armor in the field. It's heavy and it's hot, very uncomfortable and unwieldy. Any chance your new material will float? We've had service members drown in the past in waterborne accidents. And then the second one from Charlie, are you exploring armor that is malleable? Current ridge options only provide limited coverage of the chest and back.
Yeah, these are both great questions. I don't believe that boron carbide would float, but I guess I could say it would sink less quickly. So, certainly lightweighting would help from that perspective. In terms of malleability, that's a really exciting direction. We haven't done that in this particular program. And I know in particular, this is an issue, say, for women soldiers, that the fit of body armor is not really appropriate for their frame. So having something that would be malleable would certainly be of an advantage, but it's just not something we've explored in this particular piece.
So I think the main message there is, if you're a student or someone who's training in the field, we've got projects, right? There are ideas here that need to be fully vetted, especially this idea of the lighter weight or even floatable materials. Thank you, Dan and Charlie, for writing in amazing questions there. We have another question from Nate. The collaboration between universities and the government is promising, but does it extend to the private sector as well? Lori, you had noted some collaborations you had had with the University of Delaware, who then worked with industry partners to make the materials to scale. Tim, do you have plans in MC for interaction with industry?
We do, actually. We actually have our company, one of our institutions is a private company, and we have what we call the Government and Corporate Affiliates program within our center. And that's specifically designed to encourage members from both corporate world and the defense and DOE world to come and join our meetings, to attend, learn, and set up collaborations. So our hope is the materials and the knowledge we develop transitions. In my view, we've only done part of the job if we haven't transitioned that. If it just stays within the university setting, I think we're really losing out on an opportunity. So our goal is to get it out to companies and others through licensing, through papers, through discussions, through collaboration, so they actually put it to use. That's the ultimate goal.
Fantastic. Direct application, get it out there.
Out there.
Another question from Ryan, and this is for Carrie Lee or Tim, I think. How do you field test your solutions for destructing chemical weapons?
Great. Carrie Lee, do you want to take a crack, or do you want me to go?
You can go, Tim. I can briefly answer to that. Most of the field testing is done outside of Hopkins. It's done with our collaborators, with the national labs, and they take it the next step further into the direct application scenario. I remember there's actually a collaborative effort that was done with our group in the past for bioagent defeat with Indian Head National Naval Surface Warfare Center as well. And in that particular setup, they were actually doing a much larger scale experimentation using the materials that we developed in-house at Hopkins inside of a closed chamber where they're exposing the same materials that we made with, I think it was microorganisms similar to anthrax. And so that's a simulation of somewhat field testing or taking our materials to the next step. I know if Tim wants to chime in there.
So Carrie is exactly right. We tried to scale up. So first we had partners at Indian Head. And then next, because our materials were performing so well in killing anthrax or simulants of anthrax, that they said, well, can you make more? So actually Carrie Lee was part of the team that developed another 21 kilograms of these materials. And we shipped them to Indian Head, where now they've built them into basically charges, we call them, that'll be tested most likely down in New Mexico in a larger scale setting. So we do work to help make sure those transitions are happening. They occur in multiple scales: the smaller university research scale, then the DoD lab scale, and then some ultimately real world simulations.
And I imagine there's some need to keep all the details secret, but I also imagine those collaborators then get back to you and say, thumbs up.
Basically, right. They're not allowed to share the details, right?
Yeah.
But they give us the indications, is it working well or not? Certainly if they want more of your material, that's a strong indication.
That's a good sign. That's
So
a good sign.
We hope for that.
So we have time for one last question here. And Lori and Tim, this is for you. You've talked about both of these programs, MEADE and MSEE, and they are a decade long almost, right? 8, 9, 10 years. What is the value in having that length? I mean, it's pretty long for most research programs to be, funded for more than even 4 or 5 years. So tell me about the benefits of kind of these longer term research projects.
Laura, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about collaboration really is in its heart about trust. It takes time to believe that your partners are going to do what you expect them to do, that they'll credit you appropriately, that they'll use your results appropriately. And that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to get to know each other and to believe in each other. And in our experience, it's really probably a couple-year horizon before you really get there at a deep level. So these long-term programs have really allowed us the opportunity to pull together a very diverse community in terms of general diversity, but also intellectual diversity and backgrounds and institutions, and understand each other and drive this program forward in a productive way. It's also allowed the students and everybody getting trained in this program time to develop a real expertise, a deep expertise in the area. So I think it's been key to the success of this program that it's been longer term.
I think Laura is perfectly correct on that. I would add to it that this ability to collaborate well really comes down to having strong relationships. And if you have strong relationships, that collaboration will be effective. And it's not just the principal investigators, the PIs, it's also with folks at the national labs, the federal labs. And it's also among the students. So one of my students just recently wrote an article about the benefits of a consortia like the MEADE or the MC program. And he said it's allowed him to actually not only develop more professionally, but gain these relationships with many other students, postdocs, as well as faculty. It's rare for students, particularly PhD students and postdocs, to interact with that many other faculty members and researchers from national labs. This gives that opportunity. You can build that relationship over many years. And actually, during that time frame, we allow students to go and do internships at these national labs, and that's extremely valuable. But having that duration allows you to put these programs in place and to establish those relationships that really make for effective workforce development and collaboration and research, ultimately.
And perhaps now more than ever, we know the value of relationships and the importance of maintaining them after a year of pandemic. And of course, how much they enrich your life when you are working, which we do for so many hours a day. So thank you all for being here. Tim, Carrie Lee, Lori, I really appreciated you sharing these amazing programs with us today.
You're welcome. Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So next Thursday, we will be talking about aging and supporting older adults to age at home in their communities. Dr. Sarah Stanton will be with us to talk about her program, which provides support to older adults to stay in their homes and reduce the risk of injury, as well as to support their independence to care for themselves and participate in their communities. So tune in next week. It's going to be great. Until then, bye for now and be well.